Hello, PAC community. I'm Princess, a first-year PhD student in PIN's HCI group. I'm very honored to present on behalf of my collaborators, Encarnacion and Professor Danaë Metaxa. Targeted advertising is everywhere. Spending on digital advertising totals over $600 billion annually. This is 70% of all spending on ads. Yet, ad platforms are opaque. Almost all of us are subjected to the surveillance of our online and offline behavior and to automated inference making about our identities and interests. So, what does queer theory have to do with research and advertising? Advertising scholar Stephen Cates asked this in 1999, which is before I was born. To answer this question and motivate this project a little more, queer individuals and communities experience social, political, and economic marginalization that makes them very attentive to issues of representation, privacy, and classification. In other words, queer people can provide a unique perspective on algorithmic systems that purport to understand people's interests and desires. On our agenda today, research questions and the methodology of this project, 3 top-level themes from our findings, discussion of connections to queer and feminist theory, and finally, takeaways in future work. So let's go. We have 3 research questions. How do queer people experience targeted advertising content? How do they experience targeted advertising systems? And finally, what changes will queer people see is improving their experience with targeted ads? In terms of our method, we recruited 18 queer adults via mailing list online communities. With each of them, we conducted 1-hour semi-structured interviews on their experiences and perceptions of online ads, their perspectives on ad targeting, and ad targeting as related to their queerness as they saw it. We conducted reflexive analysis on the transcripts to identify the main themes across interviews. In terms of our participant demographics, participants self-identified across a spectrum of nationalities, races, ethnicities, and sexual and gender identities. So let's go on to findings. We have 3 findings related to ad content, ad systems, and alternatives. First, representations of queerness in targeted ad content are stereotypical. Next, ad targeting processes cause harm to queer people. And finally, queer people imagine shifts and alternatives in the context of targeted advertising. For our first finding, on representations of queerness in ad content being limited, ad content is overwhelmingly white and straight. Attempts at depicting queer people are usually stereotypical. A participant who identified as a gay Iraqi man said, "It's like the stereotype of what a gay man is, like super dramatized. A point where I'm like, I don't know anyone who acts like that. I don't know who's relating to that. It's how straight people think gay people act." This participant gives us one example of how ad content perpetuates homophobic and transphobic ideas about queer people. For our second finding on how ad targeting processes cause harm to queer people, the limited amount of queer ad content illustrates the wider-ranging erasure and exclusion of queer people. A participant who identified as a gay black male said, "If ad targeting took into account queer identities, I would at least feel like I'm recognized in society. But if they do not, I'm reminded that I'm left out, that many people do not accept me as who I am." In other words, if you're excluded from society at large, there's probably not a lot of ad content that actually reflects your identity and your interest, and this reinforces the exclusion that you already feel every single day. Still, in relation to our second finding, the binary gender norms that dominate ad content and consumer segmentation lead to misrepresentation. A participant who identified as white and non-binary said, "I feel the misrepresentation the most when it has to do with babies. And I feel like those ads are always very gendered, very targeted towards women and society's idea of what a woman or mother is. Those ads make me feel very weird." This participant is not a woman, but the products and images pushed toward them by advertising systems reflect gender norms. This isn't different than being misgendered, but instead of navigating a person's assumptions, it's those of an algorithmic system trained on gender norms and stereotypes. Now, on to finding 3, on shifts and alternatives. Participants wanted more diversity coupled with decreases in surveillance. A participant who identified as queer, non-binary, and Latinx/Filipino said, "It's scary how much we're already monitored and how much ad systems already know about me. I would prefer increasing the amount of diversity within advertisements without necessarily needing to know for sure if somebody identifies a certain way." This participant and many others presented the idea that more diverse content in relation to improving representations of race, gender identity, ability, and other identities doesn't actually mean better targeting. Maybe ads should just be more diverse and more expansive for everyone. Another shift that participants discussed was how they valued more organic methods of advertising. On how their ad experience might be improved, a queer non-binary Turkish person said, "Get rid of targeted ads. I feel like people around me don't shop based on seeing whatever is available in ads. Instead, they buy things because it might become popular or when a curator promotes an item." What this person is speaking to is not that people don't value the explorative power of advertising and the internet at large. However, they valued organic discovery from sources or groups that they had determined were trustworthy, not having ads continually pushed at them. In fact, most of our participants avoided interacting with ads whenever possible. And finally, participants imagined what it would look like to opt out of targeted advertising. A participant who identified as paramedic, asexual, Chinese American, and non-binary said, "The default should be that people opt out, and every website should be very transparent and give people options and explanations about what kind of information they want. I don't really consider it a choice if it's like you have to agree to targeted ads or you can't use the platform." As they shared their experiences, our participants began to reimagine advertising systems. They pointed out how current revenue models and a lack of legal accountability for ad platforms lead to choices that are not really choices, when none of us can actually say no. Now, to contextualize our findings, we draw on feminist and queer theory. Let's visualize our findings with an iceberg. The topmost finding requires the most moderate reform, and the last and deepest, the most radical changes. Recall participant 1 saying that ad content reflects how straight people think gay people act, but normative or stereotypical ideas also exert pressure on marginalized people to conform and perform as expected by dominant groups. Stereotypes and exclusion in ad content reflect homonormativity. Coined by Lisa Duggan and building on the concept of heteronormativity, this describes queerness that upholds and sustains heteronormative assumptions and depoliticizes queer communities by anchoring queer culture in mainstream consumption. At the next level, on the harms of ad processes, our participants continuously described how their ad content to them reflected the inferences and labels that ad platforms were assigning them behind the scenes. Remember the non-binary participant who described feeling misgendered when their ads reflected assumptions that they felt appropriately targeted by stereotypical ideas about womanhood? This is one way the classification and surveillance that are integral to targeted advertising can violate queer self-determination. This describes the rejection of externally imposed labels, opting out of binary roles and expectations, and disentangling individual value from compliance with normativity. Finally, on shifts and alternatives to targeted advertising, recall how the desire for more representative ad content existed alongside participants' overall distrust of advertising systems. We identified this instinct as a dialectic, a generative tension that produces a queer and feminist politic of refusal. Refusal was developed by indigenous anthropologist and feminist author Sampson and Eve Tuck to articulate how refusing to be tracked, labeled, and assessed by academic inquiry is itself a form of resistance. Ruha Benjamin extends refusal to a biomedical context, highlighting how informed consent is a norm, but nobody thinks about informed refusal. Transparency doesn't entitle a researcher or an algorithmic system to someone's yes. We extend this idea to target advertising. Balancing the power dynamics that exist between end users and advertising systems requires not only enabling refusal at the individual level, but fundamentally disrupting the norms of surveillance and categorization. And now, conclusion, question mark. What algorithmic systems would we build if the norm was asking rather than inferring? This project, in studying queer people's experiences with a specific algorithmic system and then applying queer and feminist analytics to ground up participants' insights, was never seeking a finite binary conclusion. Targeted ads are about more than business. They hold power over how we see the world, how we think the world sees us. How they label people and how people feel they are being labeled reinforces the ideas and norms that harm queer people in particular and marginalized people broadly. Queer people are already experts at resisting surveillance and categorization. So let's keep asking them, and other marginalized people, what should change, what should stop, what should come next? Surely that will lead to interventions and new systems that are more just, more interesting, and more expansive. In terms of future work, what does genuine content look like in the context of targeted online ads? How can algorithmic systems enable self-determination and refusal? And how should ad platforms, as they exist now, be regulated? We look forward to future research and algorithmic justice in pursuit of answers to these questions. Thank you so much for your time and attention. You can find my contact information on my website, psampson.net, or find me on social media on Twitter at p.samp or on Mastodon at princessahci.social. Thank you.